Hello and welcome to a new episode of Search Off the Record, a podcast coming to you from the Google search team. I am Gary today, and I think I'm joined by our Martin, who I call Morty. Hello?
Hello, yes, I'm here. Morty is here. I don't know, Rick. I don't know.
Why do I call you Morty? I call you Morty, but I don't know why.
I do not remember. I think at some point you started singing O Tannenbaum, but with like, O Mortimer, O Mortimer.
Wie blau sind deine
Augen. Aw, so nice. You're not here to talk about my eye color, though, I think.
I mean, we could talk about it for half an hour for sure, but I think not. I'm afraid that while our customers would be very interested in that topic, I am not. So, I don't have a topic. So, I looked at what you prepared,
Yeah.
and it's weird.
You don't like my topic, I know.
So, you coming in hot with a question, looking at the notes now. The first question is, are websites getting fat?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question.
Okay, I think this question is not even meaningful.
Ooh, look at you. Why is it not meaningful?
Because it does not matter in the context of a website if it's fat.
Why?
In the context of a single page, yes.
Oh, nice.
But in the context of a website, it really doesn't matter.
Ah, that's an interesting one. Cool. Okay, so we can talk about either things or both things. We'll see if time permits.
Yeah.
We can talk about websites or we can talk about web pages. Do you want to do that?
So I think first we step back a little on another word, and that would be fat.
Okay, fine. Yeah, that's a bit...
Okay, let's start again. Are websites or web pages getting fat? What is fat in that context?
That's a really nice one because I struggle with it. And I kind of posed it in a stupid and not great way. And I used fat for that because heavy, big, large, I don't know which term to use because I realized recently when I asked on Blue Sky that people are understanding different things when it comes to, call it page size.
Okay.
What is page size? It's a surprisingly difficult answer.
Well, an individual page's size can be defined.
Yeah.
Because the raw bytes, that's easy.
But that's not what everyone talks about when they mean size. That's what some people talk about when they mean size.
Right.
And that's the rabbit hole I fell into.
So what you are thinking here when you say fat is basically the raw bytes from the parent HTML plus the resources that need to be brought in, plus any media.
Maybe.
Okay.
I started at a slightly different position where I asked myself, like, so back in the days when I started making websites,
Okay.
I had dial-up internet, so I couldn't be online all the time. So some of that happened on my hard drives locally with a file and a text editor.
Yeah.
Then I needed to transfer that between the computer that was actually hooked up to the internet and my laptop, because sometimes I was working on my laptop and I had a really old laptop. It didn't even have USB. It sounds super stupid, but the only reasonable way I could transfer data was with floppy disks.
Okay.
I know. And I realized that
I was living in the same era, so yeah, I distinctly remember this.
Yeah, but like John, for instance, also lives in this, or lived in the same era, and he is like, who thinks of floppy disks? So, you know, I thought I explained.
I'm pretty sure our boss John Mueller was born roughly when the pharaohs were still running around. But anyway.
He was probably here when electricity was invented, yes.
Yes.
But, hi John, if you're listening, but I realized that I usually, even if I build like relatively elaborate things, except for if I had to transfer images, then the floppy was problematic. But otherwise, with just HTML and maybe some CSS and maybe even some JavaScript, it worked fine, and a floppy disk would fit more or less the whole website, minus images, which was fine because images sometimes, back in the days, I had no notion of copyright, so I just like hot linked effectively to images of other websites.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really like transfer size that I had to deal with or I needed web space for. But then I read the 2025 Web Almanac, which is great. We're going to link that in the description as well. It's a great look at how the web is changing and how websites are changing. And they found that in 2015, the median mobile homepage was 845 kilobytes. And that's the data that needed to be transferred over the network into the browser, onto someone's disk. That's how they define page weight.
And that is just a parent page.
That's just a homepage. That's just like, they are only looking at homepages, I think, from the crawl.
Okay, but that's just a parent page. It's not the resources.
Yeah. See, that's where I'm not so clear about their definition of page weight. That's a really interesting, they have a paragraph where they are trying to like explain what they mean by page weight. That's why I used fat to just kind of like blatantly call out that I don't understand the differences in what these things are. So they say page weight, also called page size, is the total volume of data measured in kilobytes or megabytes that a user must download to view a specific page. In my book, that includes images and whatnot.
Yeah.
Because I have to download that to see. And that's why I was surprised to hear that 2015, that was 845 kilobytes. That to me was surprising.
Why?
Because I would have assumed that with images, it would be more than 800 kilobytes.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
But anyway, 2015, 11 years or longer, depending on when you hear this, 845 kilobytes. July 2025, the same median page is now 2.3 megabytes.
Holy, that's a 3 times growth.
Yeah, and it goes roughly from a little more than half a floppy disk to almost 2. It's almost 2 floppy disks.
Almost 2, yeah.
A floppy disk was able to, under normal circumstances, 1.44 megabytes, I think. That surprised me because I knew it was growing. I knew we were also doing more complicated things. I mean, obviously, if you like basically build AutoCAD, like a software that does computer-aided design in the browser, then yeah, that's not going to work in 800 kilobytes.
Yeah.
How? But then again, on the median, I would assume that a lot of it is just websites, and that is quite big.
Yeah.
When you ask people what they think if this is big or not, you start getting very different answers depending on how they think about page size. And there is no one true definition of it.
So I think, based on what you said, that we probably need to do a better job at explaining what page size is. And if you look at our documentation about crawlers, I think about Googlebot, but I could be wrong. We say that by default, we fetch 15 megabytes of the content or of the raw bytes from a specific URL, and then we stop. And that's per URL. So basically, if you reference stuff in your HTML, then those have their own 15 megabyte limit, right?
Yes.
And that, to me, from a search perspective, not from a user's perspective, that makes more sense. From a user's perspective, it probably doesn't make sense because, well, they don't care.
Yeah.
Like, why would they care about it? It's like, what do I need to download?
I need this document, full stop.
Yeah. But I imagine that we could propose a change in the documentation for the HTTP archive or the Web Almanac to better explain what page weight is.
I mean, I wouldn't change their documentation because for their purposes and intents, I think they're explaining what it is and they're defining it rather well. I'm just surprised that with all the resources that go onto my disk at the end, it used to be only 800 kilobytes, 800 something kilobytes in 2015.
Sure.
But I don't think that the page weight or the page size or whatever, let's phrase it differently. When I think about page size, I, depending on the context, think about different things.
Yeah.
And I realized that when I asked this question publicly, that different people had very different notions of how they understood page size. Depending on the layer you're looking at, it gets confusing as well because there's also compression. So some people are like, but this website downloads 10 megabytes onto my disk. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, but the internet is slow here. And I'm like, but maybe if you look at what actually goes over the wire, you might find that this is 5 or 6 megabytes, not the whole 10 megabytes. Because you can compress things on the network level, and then you decompress them on the client side level. Which, again, if you are strapped for space on your phone, for instance, which in the past my phones typically, because I took so many pictures and videos and stuff, and I was really, really bad at deleting things. I'm kind of like a digital hoarder sometimes, especially when it comes to my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I ran out of disk space, as simple as that. And so, like, you want me to install an app? Nah, this app is like 7 megabytes. I don't have 7 megabytes.
Yeah.
So then the compression is nice for reducing the transfer time, but I don't care as much. I care more about the space on my phone that it actually occupies. So I have a different angle on this depending on what I'm looking for myself. And then it gets worse. Have you looked at the HTML version of the HTML standard?
No.
It's funky. I never really fully understood why they have a one-page version and they have a multi-page version.
Okay.
But if you look at what you have on your disk once you download the single-page version of the HTML specification, you end up with 14 megabytes of HTML.
That seems reasonable.
It's text with a bit of extra sprinkles on top. That's huge.
And it's not even a fancy website. Like,
No.
I think you are talking about the what working group, the whatwg.org or something, what WG, right?
Yes.
Like, if you look at that spec, the HTML spec on what WG, it is not a fancy website. It is really just text with some default styling, nothing else. So yeah, like 14 megabytes, that really means raw content, basically.
That is wild. And I'm not sure if they have images in there. I don't think they do. But maybe they have like some explanatory diagrams or something. I don't know. But 14 megabytes, that is a lot. And I know that I've seen websites out in the wild that are quite heavy, just the HTML that gets transferred as well. And I know some extreme cases, and I've heard of extreme cases through the Blue Sky question that I asked and the replies, where people are inlining images. So you can turn an image into effectively a very long string of characters and put that straight into your HTML, quote unquote, to avoid having to do another network request and fetch that image. So you're embedding like images and stuff into the HTML. And then obviously you end up with like a 50 megabyte HTML file.
So while you were talking, I found the single page version of the HTML Living Standard. And when you finished your sentence, that's when I clicked the link to one page version and it just finished loading. So basically that was like, what, about 45 seconds?
Yeah.
More or less?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I know.
And I'm on a fast connection, so.
It gets wilder. If you use print to PDF in Chrome, you get a 96 megabyte file, I think. Or I got one. And then if you look at the PDF version that they offer, it's, I think, 15 megabytes.
Oh.
Wild.
I mean, it's different kind of compression.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see like the PDF version of web pages oftentimes are either a lot smaller or a lot larger. And this one is like, you can tell like this is really dense content.
Do you think stuff like the reader mode alleviate anything on the user's side?
Ooh, I don't really know what the reader mode, I know what it does from a user's perspective, but I don't know what it does in the background.
I was thinking about it a little bit a while ago, and my conclusion was that it doesn't change much because, like from a loading perspective at least, because you still have to first get the resources and then the phone or the app does some magic locally to remove fluff and present you with a more readable version of the page, but at least makes the internet kind of sort of more bearable to enjoy.
Yep.
Wow, I used two weird words together. But like trying to think about it from like holistically, do you think that this even matters? Like what the weight of a web page or website is, which we still haven't clarified, by the way.
Correct, yes.
Because like, for example, for me at home, I have a 10 gigabit connection.
Yeah.
Right?
I have a 10 gigabit fiber here as well.
Yeah. And I don't feel the pain. Like, for example, if something is, I don't know, what did you say, like 96 megabytes or whatever
Uh,
for a PDF file, it will still come down in relatively short period of time. And at that point, it's dependent on the server that's sending the stuff, not on my connection.
yeah.
So to me, it really doesn't matter that websites are getting bloated. On my phone also, I have a permanent 5G from Swisscom, my phone company. So again, it is super fast. It really doesn't matter. It just comes down like that in a snap.
Ah, that's nice. Ah, sweet summer child. I'm so happy for
Yeah,
you.
right. But like I live in a bubble, right?
Yes.
But I do travel a lot. And then if I go to less developed countries, for example, then suddenly it becomes problematic because like the cell phone towers would advertise that they have 5G, but in reality, they have like a really weird, I don't know, 3G or something. Not even 3G.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you are living and what kind of connection you have as well.
It's wild. I remember when we went diving in Antarctica, we were on the ship where we had a metered satellite connection. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, what did I pay for 100 megabytes? 100 megabytes, which,
Yeah.
again, the spec for HTML is 15.
Yeah.
So just to keep that in mind, I think like $20 or something.
Yeah.
So it was expensive. Yeah. And that made me think about things like I activated data saver mode on my phone. I set the connection to metered. I did not open things like most of the social media apps I just never opened because they would suck this 100 megabyte dry in minutes. So I think it still matters, but it begs the question, at what level is what kind of weight acceptable?
Right.
And I don't have a good answer to that. And then on Blue Sky, I got into this conversation about HTML size. So in this case, there's a document that is 15 megabytes, and we both agree that pretty much most of these 15 megabytes are actually useful content.
Okay.
Because there is not much in terms of images or style sheets or whatever. It's just the pure HTML, and it's minimal markup around maximum content.
Yeah.
And then people were like, yeah, well, in that case, it's kind of okay to have 15 megabytes of HTML that you need to deal with. And we both know that our browsers, even on our relatively latest technology kind of laptops and fast internet connections, take a while to process that 15 megabytes of HTML. Actually, I wonder how much goes over the wire, because I'm pretty sure there's compression involved. Oh, God. Okay. I tried to also open this page in reader mode, and that kind of crashed the browser tab. Great. So in this case, it's kind of acceptable. But then what if the markup is only overhead? And I mean, like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, if it's like 5 megabytes, but it's only very little content, is that bad? Is that worse, as in this case, the 15 megabytes? And I'm like, that's tricky, because then we come into this weird territory of the ratio between content and markup.
Yeah.
And I said, well, but what if a lot of it is markup that is metadata for some third-party tool or for some service or for regulatory reasons or licensing reasons or whatever?
Yeah.
Then that's useful content, but not necessarily for the end user, but you still kind of have to have it. It would be weird to say that that is worse than a page where the weight is mostly content.
This is interesting because like historically, I have some beef with structured data, for example, because, I mean, this is a very long thing or long-running thing, because at one point early in Google's life, Sergey Brin, one of our founders, said that computers should be able to figure out anything from the text that they receive. So site owners / back then webmasters wouldn't need to provide anything extra. And the context was something around spam. Anyway, and then structured data comes in, and structured data is specifically not for users. It is specifically for machines. And depending how much structured data you add to a page, it can increase the bloat considerably. Like if you look at in our documentation, like what kind of structured data Google supports, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Like you can fill a page easily with just the links to the documentation. And then if you keep piling on structured data on your pages, basically stuff that users will never actually see, then what? Like, is that good? Is that bad? For the site, it's probably good, or it can be good, because it can bring in additional traffic through whatever magical stuff search engines might be able to show based on the structured data. But for the user, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, this begs the question, and it came up in discussions at the IETF being the Internet Engineering Task Force, basically who create the standards for the internet, whether we should think about separating, like holistically in general, separating metadata stuff from user visible content. Like what if we would have something like for clients, HTTP clients that you trust, you would expose an API sort of endpoint on your site where you just give the metadata that they would want, right?
Yeah.
Like in an ideal world, that is not the most insane idea. Like, for example, if you had the HTML standard, like all the text for an LLM is irrelevant. Like it will process the stuff differently than you and I.
True.
Wait, can you read?
I can read sometimes.
You can read, right? Okay, just checking. And you could have something like append parameters, like question mark output equals JSON LD, let's say.
Yeah.
And then if the client is trusted, say through cryptographic authentication or something like that, then you would serve them the purely machine readable version, even in binary format, doesn't matter. But then, unfortunately, this is a utopistic thing because not everyone on the internet is playing nice.
That's true.
We know how much spam we have to deal with. On our blog, we say somewhere that we catch like 40 billion URLs per day that's spam, or some insane number. I don't remember exactly, but it's some insane number and definitely billions. Will that just exuberate the amount of spam that search engines receive and other machines receive? Maybe. Like I would bet $1.05 that will actually increase the amount of spam that search engines and LLMs and others ingest. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting, like, there was this principle that was quite popular in the early 2000s, early 2010s, hypermedia as the driver of application state or something like that, where the idea is to kind of like have separate URLs with different representations depending on who consumes it.
Yeah.
And I think generally that makes sense, and you can do this to whatever degree, but I'm not seeing it happening as much anymore.
I don't know how much sense it makes, because one of the things that we had when, what is it called? Mobile first indexing. One of the things that came out of that was lots of documentation based on stuff that we observed when we were trying to switch over sites. And one of the, actually, do we still have the documentation for mobile first indexing? And that might actually have this still, if it's there. But one of the things that we noticed is that there's no parity between the mobile version of a website and the desktop version of a website if there's different URLs for the two. So mobile would be like martinsplitt.com/m/content.
Yep.
And then the desktop version would be martinsplitt.com/content.
Yep.
And for a very large number of pages that we observed, there was no parity between the content, or no exact parity. Content was missing. That was the worst, because then you're not going to rank for the stuff that your desktop version was ranking before. And then we had outreach campaigns about it. But then links were also missing. To me, that's harder to explain.
That's bad.
And the navigation was different. The whatever was different. Metadata was missing. hreflang was missing. Link elements were missing. And yeah, it was a pain in the
Lower back.
Thank you. Otherwise, Lisa, our producer, makes me re-record stuff. And yeah, so even for trivial stuff like a mobile version and the desktop version of a web page served under different URLs, even for trivial stuff like that, there can be large differences.
There.
So wait, I want to go back to the first question.
Okay.
The question that got us here, basically in this really, really deep and dirty hole. Are websites getting fat?
I think if we rephrase it to our web pages getting larger, I think that is true.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Is that a problem? I think that depends on the context, because we identified that some people are constrained by either slow internet connections, and that can hit us here in Switzerland as well. I know in some parking garages I have very bad reception.
Oh, yeah, you are in an atomic bunker and then you don't have reception. It's like, oh, I will cry you a river, Martin.
Correct. I was very surprised and not very happy with it. Correct. So internet connection speed is still playing a role, and I think in the last couple of years, the increase in transferred byte size has outgrown the increase in transfer speeds. If you look at the median transfer speed increase for mobile connections.
Oh.
I think so. As a hypothesis, I would have to check the data, but I feel like that's the case. The other thing is there are mechanisms to alleviate this, like caching. So, of course, you get the full painful hit in the first place, the first time you visit the website.
Yeah.
But for instance, the HTML specification uses caching. So when I reload, I don't have to like download all the 15 megabytes again.
Yeah.
Compression on the transport level, on the network level, helps as well, because then you have less data that you need to transfer. You still have as much data to store on the user's device or on the crawler's end. So yeah, that's only helping you so far, but there are ways to make this less painful. There's also this lazy loading thing where you can say like, okay, so there's a lot of heavy content, like lots of images, for instance.
Right.
We're only loading those that you actually scroll to or go to and possibly see, rather than loading all of them in the first place. But I still think it's worthwhile thinking about how much data are we throwing around.
Yeah. But the website versus web page distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, or do you agree with me now that the original question is meaningless?
Yes.
Okay. That's good.
You caught me there. That's a very good catch.
Okay. Well, it's Friday today, so this just made my day because someone finally agreed with me.
Yay.
Do you think that we need to do anything to reduce the size of pages on the internet?
That's a tricky one. And
I mean you and I as people who like the internet and work on standards and stuff.
I think, yes. I think we're wasting a lot of resources. And I mean, we had that in another episode where we said that we know that there are studies that show that websites that are faster have better retention and better conversion rates.
Yeah.
And speed is in part also based on size, because the more data I ship, the longer it takes for the network to actually transfer that data, and the longer it takes for the processor of whatever device you're on to actually process it and display it to you.
Yeah.
So, and again, like if storage is a problem, then you're excluding some people there as well. I think, yes. I think that makes sense. I also think that not everyone is, and I myself know this. I'm now building like a new website, and I'm looking specifically for a workflow that makes it easier for me to deal with images, for instance, because so far I've just been like, here is this 59 megapixel image. I know you're on a smartphone, but I don't care. Like, here is the 5 megabyte image. Good luck. Which is not the right way to do it.
May the odds ever be in your favor.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, for that specifically, internally we have a linter that prevents submission to the developer site that we are using for the search documentation if the image is over 1 megabyte.
Yeah. Interesting. Arbitrary limit, in my opinion, but yeah.
Well, I like to think that they came up with that number using some methodology, not just like I woke up and chose violence.
Yes.
And like I was thinking about it a lot, because it's like, should I ask for an exception? Because our images often are like 7 megabytes or so. And then I was looking at the compressed versus the less compressed versions of the images. And my non-blue eyes could barely tell the difference.
I know what you mean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at that point, on a big screen, and at that point, does it matter that we lost some pixels or some shades in pixels?
Yeah.
Because our images are not fine art, right?
No.
For fine art, sure. So what's our takeaways? Are websites / web pages getting fat? Are they? Yes.
I think pages, yes.
Connections are getting faster. So does it matter?
I think it still does.
Okay. How do we fix it? Maybe we talk about it in another episode.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Because there's a lot that you can do. And I'm pretty sure that every little bit helps. Not just with search engines, and we shall talk about that a little bit later, but also with your users.
Yes.
Because users definitely do like snappy websites, and bloaty pages don't help with that. Agreed?
I agree.
Your Honor. You have to say Your Honor.
I agree, Your Honor.
Thank you. Objection.
Objection. I'm not honorable.
All right. Well, Martin, thank you for the chat.
Thanks a lot for you.
This was our second chats
Yes.
today because we recorded 2 episodes. And I will leave you for 2 days, 3 days, because it's the weekend. And on Monday, I'm not going to the office because I don't want to.
Yeah, especially if there's still snow.
So I would like you to remember this face and this voice and have nightmares, please.
I thank you for the lovely conversation.
But thank you nonetheless for chatting with me.
Thanks.
If you like this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And have a very nice day, please. And thank you.
Bye-bye.
We've been having fun with these podcast episodes. I hope you, the listener, have found them both entertaining and insightful too. Feel free to drop us a note on Twitter at Google Search C, or chat with us at one of the next events we go to if you have any thoughts. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you and goodbye.